The sun is setting over the San Jacinto Mountains, casting long shadows across one of the most exclusive properties in America. Frank Sinatra stands in the middle of his compound, with a sledgehammer in his hands. His knuckles are white from gripping the handle. His jaw is clenched so tight his teeth might crack. He's not demolishing just any room. He's destroying the guest house he built specifically for the President of the United States. The guest house that cost him over $200,000. The guest house he personally oversaw every detail of, from the Italian marble in the bathroom to the specific thread count of the sheets. John F. Kennedy was supposed to stay here this weekend. Instead, he's 20 miles away, laughing and drinking at Bing Crosby's house. And with every swing of that hammer, Frank Sinatra is destroying more than concrete and steel. He's destroying the last shred of loyalty he had for the man he helped make president. He's destroying his faith in friendship. He's destroying his belief that loyalty meant something in America. This is the story of the betrayal that ended Frank Sinatra's empire. The story they didn't want you to know. The story that explains everything that came after. To understand what Frank lost that day in March, you need to understand what he built. And to understand what he built, you need to go back to where it all started. By 1960, Frank Sinatra wasn't just a singer. That's what the newspapers called him. That's what appeared on the marquees. But anyone who really knew Hollywood, anyone who understood how power worked in America, knew the truth. Frank Sinatra was a kingmaker. He was an architect of influence. He was a man who could make phone calls that changed people's lives. He had the mob in his pocket, not because he was a gangster. He wasn't, but because he grew up in Hoboken, New Jersey, where the line between neighborhood and organized crime was pencil thin. He spoke their language. He understood their code, and they loved him for it. He had Hollywood in his Rolodex, every major studio head, every powerful agent, every columnist who could make or break a career with a single paragraph. And he had something even more valuable than mob connections or Hollywood power. He had access to rooms where decisions were made, access to people who shaped the country, access to the machinery of American power itself. When a young senator from Massachusetts named John Fitzgerald Kennedy decided to run for president in 1960, Frank Sinatra saw an opportunity, not just for Kennedy, for himself, because Frank understood something that most entertainers never grasped. In America, there are two kinds of power. There's the power you perform, and there's the power you possess. Frank had been performing power for years. Now he wanted to possess it. John F. Kennedy needed three things to win the presidency: California with its massive electoral votes, the Union vote in the industrial Midwest, and the youth vote that had never really cared about politics before. Frank Sinatra delivered all three. He didn't just deliver them, he gift-wrapped them and placed them at Kennedy's feet like a loyal subject presenting tribute to a king. He performed at fundraisers across the country, sometimes doing 3 cities in 2 days. He produced campaign jingles, turning Kennedy's policy positions into catchy songs that played on radio stations from coast to coast. He personally wrote and recorded High Hopes with special Kennedy lyrics that became the unofficial anthem of the campaign. He turned the Rat Pack into a political machine, with Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., and Peter Lawford all campaigning for JFK. But more than that, more than the public campaigning and the star power and the glamorous fundraisers, Frank used his other connections, the connections nobody talked about in polite company. Sam Giancana, Chicago mob boss, a man so powerful that FBI agents literally followed him everywhere he went, a man so dangerous that when he walked into a room, other dangerous men went quiet. And Sam Giancana was a close friend of Frank Sinatra. They'd known each other for years. They vacationed together. They shared women. They shared secrets. And according to FBI files that wouldn't be declassified for decades, Sam Giancana was the man who helped deliver the Union vote in Illinois and West Virginia. Those 2 states alone gave Kennedy the electoral votes he needed to win. The unions in those states were controlled by mob-connected leadership, and those leaders took their orders from men like Sam Giancana. Did Frank ask Sam to help Kennedy? The FBI believed he did. Did Sam deliver? The vote totals suggest he did. Kennedy won by 112,000 votes, the closest election in American history. Some precincts in Chicago reported more votes than registered voters. Some union halls in West Virginia had 100% turnout, something that had never happened before or since. And Frank Sinatra believed, truly believed in the deepest part of his soul, that he had made the difference, that without him, Kennedy would have lost, that he, Francis Albert Sinatra from Hoboken, New Jersey, had helped elect the President of the United States. At the inaugural gala in January 1961, Frank performed for the new president. He stood on that stage in Washington, D.C., in front of the most powerful people in the world, and he sang the Star-Spangled Banner, and grown men cried. He sang, "You Make Me Feel So Young," and the new president laughed with genuine joy. Frank was on top of the world. He was untouchable. powerful. He had transcended the limitations of being an entertainer. He wasn't just famous anymore. He was important. He was consequential. He mattered in a way that went beyond record sales and movie box office, or so he thought. In early 1961, still riding high from the inauguration, Frank began construction on his Palm Springs estate. He already had a beautiful property, but beautiful wasn't enough anymore. He needed something worthy of hosting a president. He added a new guest wing with 4 separate cottages, each one designed for maximum privacy and luxury. He installed a helipad so the president's helicopter could land directly on the property. He spent $40,000 on that helipad alone, the same amount most Americans earned in 10 years. He installed 25 additional phone lines throughout the property, all of them secure, all of them capable of handling classified communications. The Secret Service personally supervised the installation. He built a flagpole specifically designed to fly the presidential flag, the flag that would announce to the world, "The president is here." He even had the main cottage redecorated to match Jackie Kennedy's taste, bringing in interior designers from New York who specialized in the elegant, understated style the First Lady preferred. Why? Why spend hundreds of thousands of dollars? Why obsess over every detail? Because JFK had promised to stay there during his West Coast visits, not just once, regularly. The President of the United States would be a regular guest at Frank Sinatra's home. Think about what that meant. Think about the symbolism. Think about the message it would send to everyone in Hollywood, everyone in Vegas, everyone in Washington. It would mean that Frank Sinatra had arrived, that he had reached the absolute pinnacle of American society, that he was no longer just an entertainer who amused the powerful. He was one of them. It wasn't just an honor. It was validation. It was proof that Frank Sinatra had transcended entertainment and entered the realm of power, real power, presidential power. Every morning he would wake up and oversee the construction. He would walk the property with the architects, making sure every detail was perfect. The guest towels had to be Egyptian cotton, the softest available. The mattresses had to be custom made, the exact firmness JFK preferred for his bad back. The shower pressure had to be powerful, but not too powerful. The breakfast room had to face east, so the president could watch the sunrise over the desert. Nothing was too small. Nothing was insignificant. Because this wasn't just about impressing a friend. This was about cementing a legacy. But while Frank was building his dream, someone else was building a case. J. Edgar Hoover, director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the most powerful unelected official in American government, a man who had dirt on everyone, a man who kept files on presidents and Supreme Court justices and labor leaders and civil rights activists and movie stars, and he had a file on Frank Sinatra that was 1,300 pages long. Think about that. Most people don't generate 13 pages of interesting information in their entire lives. Frank had generated 1,300 pages by 1962, and he was only 46 years old. The file detailed everything: mob associations going back to the 1940s, suspicious financial transactions that the IRS couldn't quite figure out, ties to Sam Giancana, Carlo Gambino, Willie Moretti, and a dozen other organized crime figures, tips from informants claiming Frank had personally delivered cash payments from the mob to politicians, surveillance reports from agents who followed Frank to mob-owned nightclubs and restaurants, wiretap transcripts of mobsters talking about their boy Frank, with an affection and familiarity that suggested something deeper than casual friendship. And worse, much worse, the file contained something that terrified the Kennedy administration: ties between Sam Giancana and the president's own family. Peter Lawford, Frank's Rat Pack member, the charming British actor everyone loved, was JFK's brother-in-law. He was married to Patricia Kennedy, the president's sister, and Peter Lawford was the connection between the Kennedy family and Frank Sinatra's world. Lawford had introduced JFK to women, lots of women, actresses, models, singers, socialites. He'd introduced him to parties at Frank's house where the liquor flowed freely and the morals were flexible. He'd introduced him to people the FBI was actively investigating. And most dangerously, he'd introduced the president to Judith Campbell Exner, a beautiful woman, a sophisticated woman, a woman who was sleeping with both John F. Kennedy and Sam Giancana at the same time. She was literally in bed with both the President of the United States and one of the most powerful mob bosses in America. She was carrying messages between them. She was a walking security breach. When Attorney General Robert Kennedy, JFK's younger brother and the most powerful law enforcement official in the country, found out about this, he panicked. This wasn't just a political scandal waiting to happen. This was a threat to national security. The President of the United States was compromised. The FBI had recordings. They had photographic evidence. They had hotel receipts and phone records and witness statements. J. Edgar Hoover had leverage over the President of the United States. And Hoover, that vicious, calculating bureaucrat, made sure Bobby Kennedy knew it. Bobby Kennedy made a decision. It was a cold decision, a political decision, a decision that destroyed a friendship but protected a presidency. Each phrase its own sentence. Building. Frank Sinatra had to be erased from the Kennedy circle. He had to become an unperson, a ghost, a name they no longer mentioned. And it had to be done in a way that sent a message to everyone else. If you're a liability, we'll cut you loose without hesitation, no matter what you did for us, no matter how much you sacrificed, no matter how loyal you were. March 9, JFK was scheduled to visit California for a Democratic fundraiser in Los Angeles. The plan was simple, and to Frank, perfect. The president would fly into Los Angeles, attend the fundraiser, then fly to Palm Springs to spend the weekend relaxing at Frank's compound, away from the press, away from the scrutiny of Washington. Just two friends, enjoying the California sun. Frank had been planning this for months. Every detail had been finalized. The guest house was ready, furnished with presidential quality everything. The Secret Service had surveyed the property multiple times and approved all the security arrangements. The helipad was complete, tested and certified safe for presidential landings. The staff had been briefed and vetted. The food vendors had been selected. Frank even had the menu planned down to the last garnish. JFK's favorite foods, prepared by a chef flown in from New York. Jackie's preferred wines, obtained from a private collector in France who specialized in the exact vintages the First Lady enjoyed. The humidor was stocked with the president's preferred Cuban cigars, smuggled in before the embargo made them illegal. Fresh flowers in every room, the types and arrangements personally selected by Frank after consulting with Jackie's personal secretary. Everything was perfect. Everything was ready. Then the phone rings. It's a Thursday afternoon. Frank is at the compound, doing a final walkthrough, making sure everything is absolutely perfect. The phone rings, and his assistant answers it. The assistant's face goes pale. He hands the phone to Frank and mouths the words, "It's Peter. Peter Lawford, Frank's friend, his Rat Pack brother, his brother-in-law through marriage to a Kennedy." Frank takes the phone, expecting Peter to confirm some final detail about the president's arrival. Instead, he hears Peter's voice, shaky and nervous, delivering news that will change everything. "Frank, I have to tell you something. The president isn't coming to your house." For a moment, Frank doesn't understand. There must be a mistake, a misunderstanding, a scheduling conflict. "What do you mean he's not coming? Where is he staying?" Peter hesitates. Frank can hear him breathing on the other end of the line. Then Peter says the words that will haunt Frank for the rest of his life. He's staying at Bing Crosby's estate instead. Bing Crosby. Bing fucking Crosby. Frank's rival for 2 decades. A man who represented everything Frank despised about old Hollywood phoniness. A Republican. A man who supported Nixon in 1960, who didn't lift a single finger to help Kennedy get elected. A man who sat on the sidelines while Frank risked everything to make JFK president. And now Kennedy was choosing Crosby's house over Frank's. Frank's mind is racing. This doesn't make sense. Why? What happened? Did I do something wrong? Is there a problem with the security? Peter hesitates again. Frank can hear him swallow hard on the other end of the line. Then Peter tells him the truth, or at least as much truth as he's willing to share. Bobby doesn't want the president associated with certain people. It's not personal, Frank. It's politics. Certain people. The words hang in the air, like poison gas. Frank knows exactly what Peter means. The mob, Sam Giancana, Willie Moretti, all the friends from the old neighborhood, the men who helped him when he was nobody, the men who protected him, the men who were there when Hollywood elites wouldn't give him the time of day. In that moment, standing in the guest house he built for a president who would never stay there, Frank Sinatra understood everything. He was being erased, deleted, removed from the historical record. Everything he did, the rallies where he sang his heart out, the fundraisers where he brought Hollywood's biggest stars, the phone calls he made to union leaders and political bosses, the risks he took by using his mob connections to deliver votes, all of it meant nothing. Worse than nothing. He was now a liability, a problem to be managed, a secret to be buried, a footnote to be deleted from the official history. The newspapers would say President Kennedy stayed at Bing Crosby's Palm Springs home. They wouldn't mention that Frank Sinatra had built a compound specifically for this purpose. They wouldn't mention the helipad, or the secure phone lines, or the presidential flagpole. They would erase him, and everyone in Hollywood, everyone in Vegas, everyone in Washington would understand the message. Frank Sinatra is out. Frank Sinatra is toxic. Frank Sinatra is yesterday's news. The break, quiet, controlled rage. That's when something inside Frank Sinatra breaks. Not breaks like a bone, clean and capable of healing. Breaks like glass, shattering into 1,000 pieces, some of them so small they'll never be found. He hangs up the phone, without saying goodbye to Peter. He walks to his garage, where he keeps his tools. He picks up a sledgehammer. It's heavy, designed for serious demolition work. He walks back out to the compound. His staff sees him coming, and they know something terrible is about to happen. They've never seen this look on his face before. It's beyond anger. It's beyond rage. It's something colder and more permanent. He walks out to the helipad. The helipad he built for the president's helicopter. The helipad that cost $40,000. The helipad that was supposed to be the landing pad for history itself. And he starts swinging. The first blow sends concrete chunks flying. The second blow creates a crater. The third blow breaks through rebar. He's not just destroying a helipad. He's destroying a dream. He demolished the concrete landing pad systematically, working from the center outward, each blow precisely placed to cause maximum destruction. He tears down the presidential flagpole, wrapping a chain around it and pulling it down with his bare hands when the sledgehammer isn't enough. He rips out the 25 phone lines the Secret Service had installed, yanking them out of the walls, watching the wires spark and die. He smashes the communications equipment, the encrypted telephones, the secure fax machines, everything that was built to connect him to presidential power, he destroys. His staff watches in horror. Some of them start crying. His assistant begs him to stop. "Frank, please, you're going to hurt yourself." He doesn't stop. His personal secretary tries to take the sledgehammer from his hands. He pushes her away, not roughly, but firmly. "Stay back," he says. His voice is quiet, controlled. That's what scares them most. He's not yelling. He's not screaming. He's calm, focused, methodical in his destruction. He swings that sledgehammer for hours, long after the sun sets, long after his hands start bleeding from the friction of the handle, long after his shoulders are screaming in pain. He swings until there's nothing left to destroy, until the helipad is rubble, until the flagpole is a twisted piece of metal lying in the desert sand, until every phone line is ripped from the walls, until the guest house he built for a president, looks like a war zone, because it wasn't about a house. It was never about a house. It was about betrayal. It was about a man who gave everything to a cause, who risked his reputation and his safety and his friendships, only to be discarded the moment he became inconvenient. It was about learning that loyalty is a one-way street in the world of power. You give it, they take it, and when they're done with you, they throw you away like garbage. After the betrayal, Frank Sinatra changed. Not overnight, not dramatically, but anyone who knew him, anyone who really paid attention, could see it. The swagger was still there when he walked into a room. The voice was still there when he sang. The charm was still there when he wanted something. But something inside him had broken. Something fundamental. Something about trust. He cut ties with Peter Lawford immediately. Not gradually. Not after a cooling-off period. Immediately. He fired Peter from films they were supposed to make together, eating millions of dollars in penalties rather than work with him. He removed Peter from the Rat Pack, the group Peter had helped create. He banned Peter from his restaurants and clubs. He told mutual friends, "You can be friends with him or you can be friends with me, but you can't be friends with both." And he never spoke to Peter Lawford again. Not at parties where they ended up in the same room. Not at industry events where avoiding each other was impossible. Not even when Peter's career collapsed and he became a pathetic figure, drinking himself to death in a small apartment, abandoned by the Kennedys he'd loyally served. Frank saw him across a room once in the 1970s. Peter raised his glass in a sad, tentative gesture of reconciliation. Frank turned his back and walked away. That was the kind of man Frank Sinatra became after March 1962. Dean and Sammy stayed loyal to Frank. They'd grown up in a world where loyalty meant something, where you didn't abandon your friends because some politician told you to. But even they noticed the change. The Rat Pack was never the same after 1962. The performances continued. The jokes continued. The drinking and the women and the late-night shows continued. But the joy was gone. It was a performance now. A very good performance, professional and polished, but a performance nonetheless. The real friendship, the genuine brotherhood they'd had, was damaged because Frank had learned he couldn't really trust anyone. If Peter could betray him, Peter who he'd treated like a brother, who he'd given career opportunities to, who he'd protected and promoted, then anyone could betray him. Frank also made a decision that shocked Hollywood and confused his fans. He switched political parties. It wasn't a quiet switch. It wasn't a private decision he kept to himself. He did it publicly, defiantly, making sure everyone knew. From 1962 onward, Frank Sinatra became a Republican. He supported Richard Nixon, the man he'd campaigned against in 1960. He supported Ronald Reagan, helping him become governor of California and eventually president. He performed at Republican fundraisers with the same energy he'd once brought to Democratic events. He became close friends with Ronald and Nancy Reagan, spending holidays with them, advising them, supporting them. Why? Why would a man who grew up in a working-class Democratic household, who'd always identified with unions and working people, suddenly become a Republican? Because Kennedy taught him a lesson he never forgot. Loyalty means nothing in politics. Party affiliation means nothing. Progressive values mean nothing. Power is all that matters. And Frank Sinatra made a calculated decision. If politics was just about power, if loyalty and friendship meant nothing, then he would align himself with whoever gave him the most power and respect. The Democrats had used him and thrown him away. The Republicans welcomed him with open arms and never asked him to hide his past or distance himself from his friends. So Frank Sinatra became a Republican, not because he changed his beliefs, but because he changed his understanding of how the world really worked. But the damage went deeper than politics and broken friendships. The consequences were professional and financial. In 1963, less than a year after the Kennedy betrayal, Frank was called to testify before Congress about his mob connections. It was a subcommittee investigating organized crime's influence in entertainment. They asked him about Sam Giancana, about Willie Moretti, about Lucky Luciano, about meetings and phone calls and business deals. It was humiliating, public, brutal. Frank sat there in his suit, in front of cameras and reporters, being treated like a criminal. He invoked the Fifth Amendment. He refused to answer questions. He walked out at one point, so angry he couldn't control himself, and it was a direct result of the FBI investigation that Bobby Kennedy had used to justify cutting Frank out of the Kennedy circle. Bobby had unleashed the FBI on Frank, and now Frank was paying the price. The newspapers ran the story on the front page. Sinatra refuses to answer questions about mob ties. His reputation, carefully built over decades, was damaged in a single afternoon. In 1963, the Nevada Gaming Commission held hearings about Frank's ownership stake in the Cal Nuffer Lodge, a casino and resort on Lake Tahoe. The commission had evidence that Sam Giancana had been seen at the Cal Nuffer, in violation of regulations that banned known criminals from casinos. Frank tried to fight it. He argued. He hired lawyers. He called in favors. Nothing worked. Frank lost his gaming license in Nevada. His ownership stake in the Cal Nuffer Lodge was stripped away because of undesirable associations. The empire he'd built in Vegas started to crumble, not because of the mob. The mob had always been there, and everyone knew it, but because he had been marked as a liability by the Kennedys. Once the Kennedys decided you were toxic, everyone else followed. The gaming commission followed. The casino owners followed. Hollywood studios became more cautious about giving him roles. Television networks thought twice about booking him. The Kennedy machine had done its job. Frank Sinatra was damaged goods. November 20, he tells everyone to leave. He locks himself in the studio control room for an hour. Then he goes home to his compound in Palm Springs. The compound with the destroyed helipad and the empty space where the presidential flagpole once stood. And he locks himself in his bedroom for 2 days. He doesn't eat. He doesn't answer the phone. He doesn't speak to anyone. His staff can hear him through the door sometimes, pacing. They can hear music playing. They can hear him crying. Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. drive to Palm Springs to check on him. He won't open the door. I'm fine, he tells them through the door. I just need to be alone. After 2 days, he emerges. He's shaved. He's dressed. He looks normal. But everyone who sees him says the same thing. His eyes are different, haunted. Some said he was mourning. Of course he was mourning. Regardless of their falling out, JFK had been his friend. They'd laughed together, sung together, campaigned together. But others who knew Frank better said he was wrestling with something more complicated than grief, because Frank Sinatra had spent a year and a half hating the man who betrayed him. He'd spent 18 months fantasizing about vindication, about Kennedy eventually realizing his mistake and apologizing, about the day when Kennedy would need Frank again, and Frank could tell him to go to hell. And now that man was dead, killed by a nobody with a rifle, and there was no chance for reconciliation, no chance for closure, no chance for an apology, no chance to ever hear the words, "Frank, we were wrong. We shouldn't have done that to you." Frank Sinatra lived another 35 years after the JFK betrayal. 35 years of performing, recording, making movies, making money. He had more hits after 1962. My Way in 1966. My Way in 1969. Songs that defined his later career. Songs that captured his defiant independence. He had more sold-out shows. Vegas, Carnegie Hall, Madison Square Garden, Radio City Music Hall. He could still fill any venue in the world. He had more comebacks than most people have careers. Every time someone wrote him off, every time the critics said he was done, he came back stronger. He received awards and honors. The Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1985, presented by Ronald Reagan, not a Kennedy. The Kennedy Center honors, Grammy Awards, Legend of the Year, Icon of the Century, every accolade entertainment could bestow. He married Barbara Marx in 1976 and found stability. Barbara was different from his other wives. She didn't need his fame. She didn't want his spotlight. She just wanted him. And for the first time since Ava Gardner destroyed him in the 1950s, Frank found something like peace. But anyone who knew him, anyone who really spent time with him in those later years, said the same thing. After 1962, something was different. The joy was performative. The trust was gone. He kept people at arm's length. He tested their loyalty constantly. He pushed them away before they could betray him, because he'd learned that everyone betrays you eventually. It's just a matter of time and opportunity. The Palm Springs compound still stands today. It's been sold and resold, renovated and updated, but the helipad was never rebuilt. The concrete was removed. The ground was leveled, but no one ever put another helipad there. The presidential flagpole was never replaced. There's still an empty space where it once stood. And according to people who knew Frank in his later years, every time he visited that property, every time he looked out at that empty space, he was reminded of March 1962. He was reminded of the day he learned that in the world of power, loyalty is a currency that flows only one direction, upward. You give it to people above you, they take it, and they never ever give it back. Frank Sinatra gave everything to a president. He risked his reputation, his safety, his friendships, his mob connections. He delivered states, votes, money, glamour, legitimacy, and a president gave him nothing in return. Nothing except a lesson. A lesson about power, a lesson about loyalty, a lesson about how the world really works. Frank Sinatra never forgot that lesson. He carried it with him for 35 years, until the day he died in 1990. And if you listen closely to the songs he recorded after 1962, if you pay attention to the way he sang My Way, or That's Life, you can hear it. You can hear the pain. You can hear the defiance. You can hear a man who learned the hard way that in America, loyalty means nothing if you're not useful anymore. And once you stop being useful, they'll erase you without a second thought. That is the untold story of Frank Sinatra, not the story of the music or the movies or the fame, the story of the betrayal, the story of the sledgehammer, the story of the empty space where a presidential flagpole once stood.